and this is Google is not a verb. I'll leave the QR code up there for a bit. It also is listed up at the top as a bit.ly. If you want to take a photo of that also, you can enter that straight in. But I kind of figured the QR code might be a little bit easier, especially with all our cell phones that we do so much. Now this is going to be a slightly interactive session as much as you want it to be. I'm going to present in a way as if you were the students that I was presenting to. As Ms. Helen was letting you know, yes, Reader's Advisory is one of my favorite aspects of librarianship as well as digital citizenship. And part of this, when we're talking about using reputable sources, I'm not going to talk about SC Discus in particular. I know there were other sessions that were talking about that. Most of us know about it. This is about the why for the students, getting them to understand without us just saying you have to use these things, but having them practice and discover on their own why it is important. So then that way they are more willing to use those reputable sources rather than, quote, Googling it, which is where I got the idea that Google is not a verb, it is a search engine, it is not a source, it is not an action. And so we'll get these last QR codes and then we will switch to the presentation. So again, Google is not a verb, and if once you do even have the presentation, right down in the center there, where there's that little yellow, that also goes to the link if you need that, or if anyone isn't here and wants to be able to get to that. So, did you know, first of all, this is how I started with the students, that Abraham Lincoln famously reported that not everything you read on the internet is true. Right from the get-go, especially middle schoolers, because I've done this with 6 through 12, you can adapt this for any age, honestly. I know that a lot of times we do have, say, whoops, I just noticed that the screen is not in focus and people at home cannot read it. There we go. So you can adapt it based on the links that you use for the students for just about anything. But I personally have used it for middle and high school. And even with that quote, some of the kids are like, yeah. You know, Honest Abe, of course, right? He's telling the truth about the fact that, yeah, not everything that you read is true. And then you'll see some of them be like, huh? Like, because there's just enough truth in what they've been told before that they just accept things. And that is part of the problem. So the goal of this lesson is to demonstrate to our students that attempting to authenticate common websites is actually more tedious than just going ahead and learning how to use our databases and go in that route. But again, as I said, inquiry is a really big thing for me, so rather than just telling them to do it, I like to go ahead and have this mini lesson with the students so that they basically prove to themselves why they should be using these resources, okay? So the why behind it. Students have access to information instantly, 24/7. Their smartphones are all of our students. One of my pet peeves is calling it 21st century skills. I mean, we're a fifth of the way through the century. The only people who need to remember that it's 21st century skills is us. Because we were around in the 20th century. Our students were not. They were born in the 21st century. So for them, technology and all of that is just skills. It's not 21st century skills, it's just skills, it's life. They have never known a life without a smartphone. They've never known a life without Wi-Fi, all apps, all of those kind of things. We are the ones who are having to adjust. And with that fact, again, it's both a blessing and a curse. They are more knowledgeable than we ever could have been, but at the same time, that knowledge is not necessarily all factual. Students tend to believe that their opinion, if anyone else agrees with them, then that means it's a fact. And they tend to look for things that agree with already what they believe instead of necessarily opening up. They look for things just to kind of confirm that what they already think is true. And things can be true without being a fact. And that's where when we're talking about doing something, say, for an academic reason versus their own knowledge, anything that they're interested in, we really need to make sure that they're using those databases that are reputable sources, reliable, all of that. Also, historically, I know we were taught, and again, I'm lumping you all in, even though I'm probably older than most of you in here. Historically, .org, .edu, .gov, we were told websites, and my daughter is 25. She was told these things, and it was more true then than it is now. These websites, if you just go by the domain name, that lets you know whether or not it's a reputable site, and that's not always true anymore. Same thing that when sites, and we even did this with nonfiction books, that if they included photographs rather than drawings or a cartoon, then it was more likely to be reliable. Well, creators of these websites, or even whether it's intentional or not, for misleading information, are knowing that this is how we have taught our students, and they're using some of those same techniques, not just for students, but for adults. That, again, we're looking for people to agree with us, not necessarily to learn. And Wikipedia, same thing, often viewed as a negative, but there are positive aspects. Again, my daughter was told, oh yeah, don't ever use Wikipedia. But Wikipedia is a great tool if you know nothing about the topic that you're researching. It's not a source, just like Google. Wikipedia is not a source, but it does give an overview if you if you don't have anywhere to start. It is, so there are good properties. And then also, as I said before, Googling it, it's not a verb to Google something, asking Siri, that all may provide instant access, but it's not going to necessarily be a reliable source. And in some cases, you get so many hits back so quickly. What do kids do? First one, right? What is the first one usually? Sponsored by someone. They paid to be number one. They didn't earn being number one. They paid to be number one. Our students don't pay attention to that as much. And again, adults don't always pay attention to this. How many of you have had to show to your family members when they post things on Facebook, yeah, this is not actually true, stop tagging me in these things, right? Yeah, okay. So I say students because that's where I teach this, but it also is adults. It also is adults. And I'm not going to get political, but we do know when it comes to news, you can have the same news story you're wanting to find out about, and you go to different news sources, and you're going to get a whole different spin on it. And they might not be lying, but they're certainly not being truthful. Okay? So we're going to go through a few of these, and I do talk fast, so this might not take the full 20 or 45 minutes. But we're going to go through a few of these again as if you were the students. And these are a wide variety of websites that are out there that you have to decide, are they reliable or not? So the first one we're going to go to, most of you have probably seen before, heard of, the Pacific Northwest tree octopus. Okay, it's endangered. So when I do this with high schoolers, even middle schoolers, the first thing they look at is they're like, is that an octopus in a Christmas tree? And so I tell them, go with your gut. Your gut instinct a lot of times is correct. If you're questioning it right from the beginning, then go with that. Look further to find out. So we look at that and they're like, yeah, you know what? That's probably not true. But let's keep on reading. And again, we have, it has 30 to 33 centimeters. There's measurements in there. There's links to the Olympic rainforest. We go on down. There's even maps. Then we keep on coming. Oh, why is it endangered? Oh, wait a minute. There's something else in bold there. Its natural predators include the bald eagle. Okay, that makes sense. And Sasquatch. Okay, and see, just like you guys chuckled, some of the kids are like, yeah. And others are like, wait a minute. I don't think Sasquatch is real. And others are like, yes, they are. And I'm like, okay, here's the thing. Is it been proven about Sasquatch? And they're like, no. Okay, well then, can you use that? That is another one of those gut instincts. Are you using something that's not proven to prove something else? You can't do it. And of course, by this time, especially the high schoolers, but even middle schoolers are like, yeah, we know that this one's fake. I'm like, yes, obviously it is. But put yourself into your elementary self. Imagine you're just being introduced into nonfiction. You're in, say 3rd grade, 4th grade, and your teacher assigns you an endangered species project. And you stumble across this. How awesome do you feel to think that you are the only person in your class who knows about this? Because you've never heard about it before, so you're going to impress everybody with this new endangered species. And then you do all of this work, it has links, you check all of these things, and then you come to find out that you were fooled. So that's where we start off, bless you, we start off with something for them to realize that, yeah, this is obvious. But there are students out there who would be fooled by this. And that's just to start getting their attention. What I also let them know is, of course, you always want to check down at the bottom and see who is it that runs the website. And where are we for, it's not showing up on here. There we go, Lyle Sabato. Okay. Your source for conspiracies and other diversions. So this just shows them again, yes, you can go and find out more about the person, whether it's an author, whether or not it's the person who runs the website, that confirms what your gut was telling you. That yes, in fact, this is not a reputable website. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. Let's go to the next one, Wikipedia. Okay, we talked about the fact again that Wikipedia is not a reliable source because it's not a source. Wikipedia, in a way, it's a compilation of information. And what a lot of students don't realize is the footnotes. We were born of an age with footnotes. They are not. So they just go right past all those little numbers, have no idea what they're there for, and they don't care. Again, if it confirms what they already think, why would they want to look any further? But even with this, I pulled up internet censorship, and the reason that I want to show is, again, as I stated, Wikipedia is a great place to get a summary of a topic that you're not already familiar with. But as I show them, you have to go to those footnotes to look at the original source and then decide whether that is reliable. So can you use Wikipedia? Sure. Do you have to take a lot more steps to determine if it's reliable? Yes. And that's what we're trying to get them to believe, so then they realize this is more tedious than using the databases that we really want them to use. So I'm going to click on number 3 here, and it won't let me open it because it goes to the New York Times and I don't have a subscription and I've used up my free access. But it's Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen, The Future of Internet Freedom, from the New York Times, archived originally in 2014, and then it was reposted again in 2020. If you open that, and it's the New York Times, do we think, is the New York Times reputable? Yes, okay. What they don't pay attention to is when you open up that article, and if you guys haven't used your free 6 articles or whatever it is that they let you read for free, it's the opinion pages. Students just think, it's the New York Times, of course I can use that. But it's an opinion page. That is not a reliable source. That's someone's opinion. So that just showing them again that the reason that we use these things, getting them to decide, oh yeah, I was in that session yesterday, it was amazing. Getting them to discover this and believe it for themselves is highly important. Okay, now this is where you guys are going to do some of it, and this is what I would show with them. In their table groups, I would either assign, depending on the class, either assign or have them to go where they're sitting. I would give each of the tables a website to go to. And I don't tell them that all of them are unreliable. I tell them that they have to use those skills to decide. And to this day, no matter how many websites I've given, say I have 5 different tables and I give them 5 different websites. It's never yet been that by table 5, they go, hey, wait a minute, all the other 4 have been unreliable, so ours probably is too. They've never figured that out yet. So I don't tell them ahead of time that they either are or are not. I tell them to use the skills that we've talked about. It's their job to figure out whether or not they are reliable. So, all about explorers. I'm going to give you guys a hint. This website was created by teachers for this exact purpose. It was to prove to students that not everything that you read is true. Some of you are nodding your heads, you've seen this before. The interesting part, though, is that there is enough real, factual information on here that some of our students are fooled, especially elementary and something like this. Amerigo Vespucci, they've heard of him. It says on here that he was born in the United States, but his parents were unable to pronounce America properly, so he was then known as Amerigo. Okay, what have students been told? Why are we America? Because of him, because right, it's the opposite, right? There's enough of what they've been told that once again, it reinforces what they think they know. And then it goes on saying that he wrote to Christopher Columbus, all of this, that they wanted to discover, but then the whole world listened on the radios to find out which of them would be first. So there's some things in there that are pretty obvious. The further that they read, it goes on. But it's good enough, especially, say, for elementary, to fool students because of the fact that there are facts in there that are very similar. I shouldn't say facts. There's information in there that is very similar to the true. If you go to the Christopher Columbus one, it's really funny because it says he was born in 1942. And if you ask a student to read that sentence out loud, what do they say? 1492. Even though it says right there, 1942. So that again, this is kind of letting them discover for themselves instead of us telling them, don't use it because you're going to stumble across these things. We let them explore it. And then what I do is in those table groups is I would have given that website to a table and tell them, go through this and you have to tell us, what do you think? What made you think it was real, factual? What made you question it? And then they would come up to the board and present it to everybody else and let them know whatever their findings were. Now, I don't tell them that anything is wrong. Because in this case, if it is what they're exploring, it's not wrong. It might be what I have seen, like the 1492 versus 1942. But if there's anything else in there, it's not wrong because that's what we want them to do is question it. So even if they question something that is true, that is still part of that inquiry process. They're still questioning what is in front of them, and that is the whole point, is that we don't want to tell them, no, don't question something. It's, yes, continue questioning, looking at it further, and then discovering for themselves that, yeah, it is either, it is factual, they do believe it, or it's not reliable. So then we go to this one. This is one of the high schoolers' favorite. Doesn't work as well in middle school because they don't have as much, say college knowledge, but the University of Antarctica. Now, notice the domain name, antarcticaedu.com. I do not write this one down. If I go around, sometimes I'll put a note on the table that has the website I want them to go to, or I'll have links. But I always make it a point that with the University of Antarctica that I do not show it written down anywhere. Can anyone figure out why? What is the domain name again? Okay, Antarctica what? EDU. Hello, EDU, right? Oh, wait, what was that?
.com.
Oh, not .edu. Okay, but here's what happens. Every single time I have used this one, I'll walk around and I do it quickly on purpose, is I don't make University of Antarctica last. So I'll go around and I'm like, okay, you guys are going to antarcticaedu.com. Okay, now I want you guys to go to the allaboutexplorers.com and look up Amerigo Vespucci. And then what'll happen? Miss Burge, it doesn't exist. I can't find antarctica.edu. I'm like, oh, maybe you typed it wrong. antarcticaedu.com. Oh, did you have a question over here? And I keep saying it, and then I leave them. Every single time, what do they type in? Antarctica.edu. Because that's what they've been taught. So then I'm like, oh, well, maybe here, let me do it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, see, it works. They never notice that it's .com. Nobody has ever noticed that it's .com. So then they go through, though, and they're like, okay, yeah, there's some smiling kids in the sunshine. I want to go to that college. It looks fun, okay? Because we notice as we start going through it a little bit more, is that the type of picture you would imagine of students in Antarctica? No. But if you're searching for colleges, is that not the kind of picture you want to see if you're going to school there? Yes, okay? You want the sunshine and the friends and everybody. Look at, they're all smiling. If it was really Antarctica, you wouldn't be able to see your face, would you? Okay. So, that, it flies right past them. It flies right past them. So if they still aren't sure, I tell them to go to student life. And then they look at athletics. They can look at anything. Whoops, that was admissions. I want to go to athletics. Okay, so a little bit more. Okay, yeah, there's hockey, but you can't even see it because there's fake snow over it. And then you keep coming down, and one of their intramural sports is snowball fighting. That starts to get them to go, wait a minute. I mean, snowball fighting is fun, but I've never heard of that as like an organized sport. So they start to question it a little bit more. And then I'll go back and say, okay, look at the domain name. Once they start questioning it themselves, and they're like, you fooled us. You said antarctica.edu. Like, no, I didn't. That's what you heard. So that is a fun one, again, with the older students. And so this last one, and we are going pretty quickly here, but this last one is honestly a favorite, though, and I just scroll on up. Even though this one doesn't say anything, there's one that I can't find anymore, and I'll tell you about that in a bit, where sometimes I will, instead of letting it show, I will scroll up, because there might be something that's being given away up in the top. But I tell them on this one that, yeah, everything in here is true. I'm like, I know there's a lot of scientific information, but I'm just letting you know ahead of time. Everything in here is true. And they're like, okay. I was like, but it is still your job to decide whether or not this has value. Is it reliable? And they're like, well, what's the difference? If it's true, doesn't that mean it's reliable? Not always. So we go through here about dihydrogen monoxide, and if you're going to use this, you need to be able to say dihydrogen monoxide without even thinking. Yes, ma'am?
Oh, no, trying to see.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Oh, you're one of those, no, I'm just stretching. But you have to, if you use this, you have to be able to say dihydrogen monoxide without sounding it out or hesitating. You have to say it fast. So we go through there, and I tell them, yeah, it's the frequently asked questions, which is always found on any of the substance bottles that we have in the school, like for cleaning or whatever. So generally speaking, when I introduce something, I kind of like hype it up, like as if this is just normal. Dihydrogen monoxide, yeah, it might be listed on one of those sheets that we have in the red binder that's next to the sink, or with the spray bottles that say students can't use them, all of this. So they're just listening to me of like, yeah, this is normal stuff. And then we go in and I tell them, I'm like, yep, that's the MSDS, blah, 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 all of this. And then we go down here and it's like, oh, well, can be concerned about this? It's like, yes, you should. While dihydrogen monoxide itself is not a poisonous substance, it is found in many poisonous substances. So should we be concerned about it? And they're all like, well, of course. Like maybe we do need to have further studies on this. So we keep going and just read a little bit about it, and why haven't you heard about it? All these different things, why you should be concerned, what are some of the dangers, and it's like, yeah, there's accidental inhalation, okay? Prolonged exposure to dihydrogen monoxide in its solid form can cause physical injury, tissue damage. Oh, and they're just like, wait. Are you for real? Like, they're like, do we have this? I'm like, yeah, I have it in my house. And then, and some of them, they really start getting into this about not even anymore paying attention to, are we looking at this as reliable? They start just getting into the fact that, where do we, I'm like, you probably have some in your house too. I mean, I'm pretty sure that you have some in your house. And we keep going and keep going. I'm like, remember, everything on here is true. We keep going, and then there'll be one kid, always one, one kid who's like, dihydrogen monoxide, isn't that? I'm like, yep, and I'm like, you got it. And then they'll start in like, oh yeah, I heard about this stuff, and they'll get in there with me, and then the kids are like, come on, tell us. And I was like, okay, let's go back up to the top. Dihydrogen monoxide. What do we know about science when we're talking about words? We have chemicals and all of these things, and let's think about like on the periodic tables and this. I'm like, what does the prefix di mean? And they're like, 2. I'm like, okay. What is hydrogen? And they're like, well, I'm like, no, like if we were going to use a symbol, what's hydrogen? Oh, H. I'm like, okay. What's mono? 1. What's oxide? Oxygen. And some of them, What is dihydrogen monoxide? Water. Okay, does water in its solid form, if you have prolonged exposure, cause tissue damage? Yes, what did we call it? Frostbite, yeah. Okay, is water found in many poisonous or toxic substances, even though water itself is not toxic? Yes. This is the one that, especially for high schoolers, they're just like, okay, we got it. Yes, now we understand. We will use the academic resources that you want us to. So again, this whole presentation is not about it showing them, even though I do show them afterwards, but for you all, this presentation is not about how to use SCDiscus or other databases. This is how do we show to students without telling them? How do we let them discover for themselves? This is why it is actually better for you in the long run to learn how to search using a database and getting that information that is reliable right from the beginning, rather than having instant access to true information, but it's not reliable for anything scientific, okay? A few of the ones that I was not able to pull up anymore because either they don't exist or they're blocked and stuff like that, which sometimes I would even be in school. There would be some that I would go to that were blocked on the firewalls, and I would just read it to them from my phone because it was for an educational purpose and it was highly necessary. But then I would do a chart like that. This is where we would fill this in as just how you were being the students. When they would come up and tell us what did they see that was maybe a pro, what was a con, what made them question, and we would just start listing the things for them to then say, okay, yes, this is a reliable source, this is not. And again, all of them are unreliable, but I don't tell them that ahead of time. So a couple of the ones that, and I'll just put that back up there just so you can see, oops, oh, my husband just replied. I had texted him right before and I was like, there's already 16 people in my session. And now there's like more than that. So he was just replying on there that yes, because I told him that if there were only 5, I was going to be happy. But so thank you, I'm ecstatic. But some of the ones that, like I said, I was not able to find is one of them is through improbable research. And it was actually a paper, quote paper, a research paper about do we need to study the effect of double strength placebos? And yeah, thank you. But again, it was scientific information in there, right? You know, I mean, it was a study, or you know, okay, well, if we know that 1 placebo what the effects are, but we don't know what 2 is, and sometimes when you double, that's not, it's like it becomes exponential, right? So say I would do these things again into it of like, when we double something, you know, all of this stuff, and kids are like, oh yeah. And I'm like, well, what happens if you take 1 Advil? Okay, what happens if you take 2? And they're like, well, it's twice as much. Okay, well, what about placebos? If we only know what 1 is, don't we need to study for 2? And they're like, well, yeah, because I don't know what it's going to do to me. I do. And so we start talking about that part of it, and then similar to the dihydrogen monoxide is you'll have somebody, you know, raise their hand and be like, doesn't placebo mean like a sugar pill or this or that? Or like, and if they don't get to that on their own, I'll ask them, like, okay, well, before we go any further, let's figure it out. What is a placebo anyway? And then someone will be like, isn't that something that like your doctor gives you? I was like, yeah. Okay, but what effect does it have? And some of them have heard the word before, and they, in the back of their mind, know what it is, but they don't know how to express it in words. So for them, having 2 might be something that they're concerned about if we only know what it's like to have 1. And so again, that inquiry, letting them figure this out. And then we go into the math lesson part of, okay, well, if a placebo has 0 effect, what is 1 times 0? Okay, what is 2 times 0? What is 10 times 0? And then it's, again, one of those aha moments of, okay, you got us, we're going to look at the academic resources instead. One that I can't find on there anymore that honestly was the one that I would use for the most impact. These other ones were kind of fun, and and you actually can still go to it, but mine was still spinning because they kind of lost their sponsor, but it's for a good reason. It's martinlutherking.org.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to mention it.
Yes, yeah, and I can't pull it up anymore. It's martinlutherking.org, and the page itself is in black and white, looks kind of newspapery, has photographs of Martin Luther King Jr. In the article mentions Strom Thurmond, which students, in South Carolina, and I did this originally in North Carolina, they've heard of him, just know that like, oh yeah, that's somebody that's like, famous, okay, that proves that this is real. There were judges listed, there were court cases listed, there were dates listed, all of and it's .org, all of the things we tell students to look for, all of them. And the whole article was discrediting Martin Luther King Jr. and saying that we should not be honoring him. There's a lot of narrative in there that I don't let the students see, because in part of it, it accuses him of rape. But I know where and when I could pull it up, where and when to stop and scroll it, so that they didn't see the lies, but they saw the parts I wanted them to. The dates you could prove, like I said, court cases, people in government, the things I wanted them to see that, like, yeah, this is all the stuff that we're supposed to see. And then I'm like, okay, well, so this one really looks like it's authentic. What do we do then if we're not sure? And they're like, go and check the bottom, see who it is. You scroll onto the bottom, and when you click on the link, it pops up to Stormfront. And one of the schools I was at, it would pop up the big red banner of this site is blocked, and the kids, you should have heard the intake of breath. Miss Burge, they're gonna know you went there. And I'm like, it's okay, let them know that it was for a lesson. I'm not gonna get in trouble. And showing them that it's a white supremacy group. And they're just like, oh, you're gonna get in trouble. I'm like, no. If anyone did question me, I'm okay with that. Because I'm glad it's blocked. You shouldn't be going to these things. However, the point is, are we going to be fooled by information when we don't even know who it comes from? And then when you do find out who it comes from, are you going to listen to a white supremacy group on their opinion on whether or not Martin Luther King Jr. deserves a holiday? Whether you personally believe he does or not, is this the group that you are going to use to back up your opinion or whatever it is? So no. Everybody was like, no. And again, the coolest thing was that they were all concerned that I was going to lose my job because I went to a forbidden site, which was actually kind of cool. So yes, and that's the reason I would show them that, is I'm like, hey, all the other things we did, they were fun. They didn't really hurt anybody. But this is hateful. This is hurtful. And this is what can happen when you don't use reliable sources. You can stumble on things that not only are just unreliable, but they can actually be hurtful. And so that, again, I only do that one with high schoolers, not with middle. Again, whole thing is just that inquiry. We can tell them all day long, use SC Discus, use this, use your Boolean operators, do this, whatever. Let's go to the advanced search. We can tell them all of these things. But for most of them, they're like, I don't want to learn the difference between and or because it's opposite of what I think it should be. They don't want to do that. They don't want to have to learn something new. They want to just do what they're used to, which again, smartphones, they're used to Google and Siri. So this is my way of letting them discover and prove to themselves why it is worth that effort to use the academic resources. And we all know when they get to college, that's going to be pushed even more. So I feel that in high school is at least the time we need to introduce it. Whether they all use it or not, that's really up to the teacher who's grading the assignment. I ask my teachers to require it. And the way that you know is if you're on SC Discus, it's either going to have the SC Discus logo or it's going to have EBSCO or Gale or anything up in the corner. Also, you're going to know because when they do their citations, it's going to be formatted correctly if they get it from SC Discus than if they go onto Google and it says google.com / whatever. Like, you know they didn't do it. They don't pay attention to that. So just, again, I appreciate you all being here, playing along with me and all of that, but my whole inquiry. We're not truly teaching them. We're not really, they're not really learning if they're not having that inquiry and wanting to dive into these things rather than just doing what we're telling them. So, are there any questions at all? Yes, ma'am.
So when you are teaching this and then kids, they want to do wrong.
Right.
They're going to.
Yes, they will.
Do you have any sort of like checklist worksheet? Because I've done it before. I'm like,
Yes.
all right, does it have an author's method?
Right,
All
yes.
that, like, it's got like 3 out of 5, it's hard, but do you have any sort of like guide for them to use that's like a worksheet?
I don't do it as a worksheet on there. I usually have the first lesson with that of where they come in. Usually when I'm doing this, they've already chosen whatever their topic is for that class. And that way I mingle around and ask them, do you have any questions? Can I help you format? Because also with this is when we're using the databases, I don't go into a huge about Boolean operators because some of them is still just so over their head. I usually introduce it, but then that's it. If they want to learn, I'll kind of do that on the side. But I do talk to them about in their search of not putting in what date did such and such. It's like just the keywords. You don't want to be matching the, and all those. So I'll talk about those things, and then honestly, I'm not a super big fan, but the best that we have had success for is when, especially if it's an English teacher, if they require an annotated bibliography. Because that has to have more information in there, and you're going to see right away, even from the citation that they put, okay, is this, we can tell even with a lot of that just by looking. I mean, if it's going directly to a site rather than to an article, we're going to be able to see that information. So there are a lot of those charts out there, but because so many of the websites and things, I mean, again, .org, edu, if it was the Antarctica, they would have all written down Antarctica edu and it would have passed muster. So, yeah, it's more I want them to question, not necessarily just write it down.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Thank you. Yes?
A couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
When you said the Martin Luther King website,
Yes.
that's always my go-to.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But back in the day, too, there was the big sharks in Lake Michigan.
Yes.
And
Yes.
big web page
Mm-hmm.
and all of that.
Yes.
It's a great resource. When I do this, and usually it's because I'm doing the lessons in Discus, I teach middle school, so I had to get on their level. And I said,
Yes.
how can I do that? So I started using texting. I was like, trustworthy, reliable, accurate, TRA.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And they are your BBF, best friends, BFF.
Yes.
And then CYB, cover your butt. That's why you do a bibliography.
Yes.
So I do texting. Okay, if I was texting you, I would
Yes.
say TRA,
Yep.
CYB, BFF.
Yes.
That's all you need to know. But then what do you do when you go through all this and then you got teachers that play ball with you and say, okay.
And then they let them do whatever.
And then they go back to the classroom or whatever, and they're on Google doing da-da-da. I mean, I constantly fight that battle.
Yes, so what I do is then I generally will follow back up with a class, but I also let them know, like, we have what's called nest time. So that's 25 minutes in the day where students, they go to a class, but it's kind of like an extension. And so we host a lot of students in the library during that time. So I let them know we're also open for lunch. So if they, either with a pass in the regular classroom or during one of those times, if they want to come in and see me, if they have any questions, they can email me any of those. And then if I see that they're going to a site, I'm like, oh, well, remember, let's go over here, and then that will probably solve whatever your question was. So just keep redirecting. And then even if it's not within that lesson, if students that I notice from a class are in another class that comes in for something, I'll just ask them, oh, how is that going? What site what resource did you find on SC Discus was most helpful for you during that project? And if they're like, I'm like, oh, well, remember, for that one, I think the point of view would be good. So it's just like kind of that constant reminder But no, it's not going to solve everything. There are teachers that, hey, I've done all this, said it's great, wonderful. I've said, please require this. And then they go into the classroom, and I stop in, and I go looking around, and I'm like, Google, 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 Google. It's all, everybody's on Google. There'll be the one student, and I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for using this. And, you know, I talk about it anyway, but talk a little loud and be like, are you finding that it's helpful? And they're like, oh my gosh, yes, it took longer in the beginning, but now, you know, and whatever. So it's just keep on plugging.
Yeah, and I always tell them, you know, time is valuable.
Yes.
You'd rather be on your FaceTime, TikTok, Instagram. So if you go to these sites,
Yes.
you know they're reliable, it cuts your time in half. Why are you
Exactly.
wasting your time on Google?
Right, exactly. Yes, yes. Any other questions? I know it's about time, so yes.
Like at the high school level,
Mhm.
do you go through all of that as one lesson or is that?
Our classes are 85 minutes, so I only talk in the beginning because all of that other part going through the different lessons, I go through one or two and then I assign them and then they sit together for 15 minutes or so and then they present it back to everybody else. So, and then usually at the end, there's time where then we go ahead, either that lesson or on another day, they come in and then it's like, okay, now let's go to SC Discus. Let's have your topics. Let's take a couple of them and put them in there and see. And sometimes I'll even show them the difference of if you enter the same search in Google versus something and say, you know, point of view. To see the difference, and they're like, yeah, Google gave me a lot more responses, but none of the top ones were anything I needed. When I went to SC Discus, everything was at least informative, even if it wasn't exactly to my topic, because they don't always use the right keywords. So it's kind of an ongoing thing, but the way I look at it is, again, that inquiry, if I can get as many of them as possible to at least try, then if they hear it over and over, hopefully, and again, even if they don't use it in college, in high school, by the time they get to college, it's going to be a requirement. And, you know, then at least they're not behind the game when they get into an English 1 class in college and they've never heard of this stuff before. Because we do have students who have never heard of any of these before. So, thank you. Yes?
You know, all the, I teach statistics, and I tell them, I know you're gonna Google, I know you're gonna Google, but be wary of the domain
Yes,
name.
yes.
Can you go into that?
Oh yes, that was in the beginning.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah, I
yes.
can't
No, it's okay. Yes, ma'am. And what we talked about is the fact that we were always taught that the domain name could help you with that, but there's so many out there now even for the .org, anything can be an organization. It used to mean something to be a .org, not so much anymore. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for asking that. All right, you guys are wonderful. Thank you.